Yo, what's good? We talk about the unveiling, son. You alright? What's up, guys? It's Caleb Merton coming at you now to talk about Sincere and the Unveiling, a track off of my new record, The Unveiling. Available now everywhere. Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, YouTube. It's available everywhere. Go listen to it. But I'm going to give you guys a breakdown of this track. I'm going to give you guys some breakdowns of some other tracks too, because why not? I want to talk about them. I love them, alright? I'm going to talk about the songs that I love, and I love these songs. So, The Unveiling is a concept album, and there are themes that are woven throughout the whole project, which is why I always recommend, if you're going to listen to one of my albums, you should actually listen to the whole thing through at once, if you have the time, just because there's themes that reoccur throughout the whole project that I think make each song better. So we're going to break down some of those themes today. We're going to get into the details of some of the music, because there's some things that happen in this track that I think are really, really cool. I think you'll appreciate. So just to say like a few things about the whole project. So the Unveiling album started actually as an EP that I was going to call the Heartstrings EP. I started writing it at the height of lockdown. So I was in this really contemplative mood, and I was in this really contemplative place lyrically. So I was writing all these contemplative tracks, and I was like, I'm gonna call this the Heartstrings EP because it's all about feelings. So I was writing this EP, and then out of nowhere, I was like, ooh, you know what would be a good track? Conquerors. I listened to a lot of jazz, and I felt like I might be able to swing things into this jazzy direction. So the Heartstrings EP started off as a super cinematic sounding thing, and then started becoming really jazzy with Conquerors. And then Sincere came out. And as soon as I started making Sincere, I was like, okay, throwing all the old stuff out the window, we doing this. So The Unveiling as an album is about the relationship between the bride of Christ, which is the church, and the groom, which is Jesus himself. And so a lot of the songs are love songs from the bride to the groom. And then there are also songs about identity that the bride is taking hold of, that it's seeing in the groom. Because the bride is defined by the groom. As the body of Christ, we're defined by the head. So from a lyrical perspective, Sincere is really about authenticity and relationship with the Lord. All the lyrics are about like wanting to be in this place with the Lord of authenticity. Whenever I write a song, I'm always thinking about the people who are going to listen to it and what it is that I want to tell them. And the thing that I wanted to tell all of you guys in this song is that it's possible to have this level of relationship with the Lord that is authentic, that's not flowing from this place of tradition or habit, or I have to do this, I have to follow these rules and do this thing and then God will love me. But rather it's like this authentic relationship with this being who is there for you to have a relationship with, just like any other person that you come into contact with. Although God is not like any other person that you'll ever come into contact with. But in terms of the relationship and the knowing and the true level of feeling that you can have towards him, it's the same. And so the song is talking about this reality that the Lord is more than just a thing that you need, which is where the lyric, you're more than just a well I've come by to satisfy my thirst, comes from. Like, he's more than just this thing that you need. He's everything. And you can lose yourself in that place. And as you lose yourself in that place, you come into this place of sincerity and relationship with God. Lyrically, a lot of the time, I'm actually inspired by the music. I usually will tend to write like the music first. And then whatever I'm feeling as I'm listening to that will end up becoming the lyrics. So when the chorus of this came out and it felt really like whimsical and moving, and felt like it was just a vibe that I could get lost in. In fact, the original name of the track before I came up with the lyrics was The Vibe. So I was like, this is just a vibe. We're gonna get lost here. So I wanted to talk about that lyrically and explore that idea lyrically too. So that's where the lyrics came from. Super simple, came out really easily. There's also a sense in which Sincere and the Unveiling is a two-part song, hence the name Sincere and the Unveiling. The second part of Sincere is this long instrumental section that happens after that really fun electronic beat drifts off. And that super long instrumental section is what I'm actually gonna break down in detail in Ableton back here, because that section is the main theme of the whole album. And it gets broken down further and explored further in the three variations that happen throughout the album. Variation 1, First Glimpse. Variation 2, Waiting. And Variation 3, Face to Face. So, let's get into it. So, the instrumental section. So just to explain how this whole thing started, it started with this bad boy over here, my Nord. So there's this custom patch that I make on the Nord that I use in almost every track on this album. And that is this sound here. This sound is always somewhere. So, just to give you some background musically of what's going on here. Essentially, what I wanted this to feel like was we've gone through this place of like talking about sincerity, and now we're going to step into a new space. And what that new space is this heavenly chorus thing that feels like, oh snap, something is being unveiled and revealed to me. And this sound is actually where the name of the album came from. This whole instrumental section here. Because as I was listening to it, I was like, something is being revealed here. Something is being unveiled. So the whole theme from the album came from this one section. But I had no idea that was going to happen when I sat down and wrote it. And I don't even know if you could really call it writing, because it came from improv. So I had the whole instrumental section before this, which is the groovy electronic part that you should go listen to if you haven't listened to yet. And it comes out from that, and I was like, okay, something different should happen here. So I wasn't sure if I was going to write a bridge or what. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to set up my Nord, I already actually had it plugged in because it plays during the chorus too. And I was like, I'm just going to play something and see what comes out. And I had written this chord progression for this other track that I posted on my SoundCloud a long time ago, where it had one note that was holding throughout the whole thing, and it just went down the scale of that key. I think it was in C. And so I played every note that was in a C major scale and tried to figure out how I could get it to work with that one note. And I think the note, if I'm remembering, was a B. So I did that, and that kind of spurred the beginning of this, which is this transitionary chord thing that flows into this theme that starts to play throughout the rest of the album. And I'm always playing with this idea. So I'll play that for you here. And then here it switches. And it starts to flow into this thing that's circular. But as soon as I played that, I was like, this is interesting. Let me build a whole thing that goes around this idea. Since this is in A flat, the note that's being held throughout this whole section of the song is actually a G. And so it starts here on what I like to call a transitionary chord, and the circle fits. So thing to know about me, I am obsessed with the circle of fifths. I'm particularly obsessed with transitions in the circle of fifths. So what the circle of fifths is, if you're not a music theory head like me, is the circle of fifths is essentially the way that different keys connect to one another. So if you were to take C, the key that's a fifth higher than that is G, and the only difference between a C scale and a G scale is one note. So you can play things in C and you can play things in G, and as long as you don't hit that one note, the way that you perceive what key it's in is entirely based on convention, or what you typically hear. So I play with that idea a lot throughout this entire album. And it's something I've kind of always hinted at because I've always been obsessed with it, but this is the first album where I truly dove into that guns blazing and was like, this is the album about the circle of fifths. From a music theory perspective. So it starts with this chord that's like a transition chord into the key that's a fifth higher. So it feels like we're going somewhere else. And now it feels like we're more grounded in that other key. Especially here. And then here it switches back. There, that note introduces that one note that's different between the two keys. And so because that note got played, and now we're situated back in the original key that the rest of the song is, which is A flat. But this chord is the sixth in the key that's a fifth higher. So now it starts to feel like we're kind of floating back and forth between these two keys. And then it plays that note again, situating it back in the key below. But this is a transition chord. And now it's starting to open up. And it just continues to open up and open up. And so essentially what that's doing is creating tension, because every time there's a note in the chord that feels like it should be a resolution, another note is changing and creating an opening for the next chord. So it feels like this constant exchange of resolution and tension, where you're like, I feel like that resolved, but I also feel like it opened up something else, which creates this feeling that every chord flows into the next chord, and there's not a beginning and there's not an ending. Which is how the Lord is. So I wanted it to have this feeling of this circular, infinite thing that has no beginning and has no ending. And so I used that circle of fifths things to play with it. Now, mind you, I am not the sort of person who sits down and writes all these things out. I sat down at the keyboard and started playing this, and then afterwards went back and looked at it and was like, oh, that works because of the circle of fifths, and every chord is trying to resolve to the next chord. But I had no idea when I was playing. I was just like, this sounds crazy, and I really like how this feels, and I can tell that something really interesting is happening here. So I was just sort of choosing the chords based upon how much I wanted you to feel like you were in one key versus the other, and really playing with that tension. So that's the sort of core of the idea in this instrumental section. To build on all of that, we have all of these other instruments. So if I play it again, there's all these other things that are happening. There are these things, there's a choir that's singing that one note that I want you to focus on, because that note gets held throughout the whole track. So if I find that choir, I think it was actually a Labs instrument that I used. If you don't know what Labs is and you make music, you better learn what Labs is, because it's amazing. It's this free thing that's these free VST plugins that are given out by Spitfire Audio. It's an absolutely amazing company. Shout out to Spitfire. But I wanted to sort of drive home that G, because one of the cool things that I really like about this track, which is a thing that people don't usually do, is that one note gets held throughout this entire instrumental section, and it really adds to a lot of the tension, because a lot of the chords that are going with, to have that one note in it makes them really dissonant, and so getting that to feel like there's some resolution to it makes it extremely satisfying. And I also wanted the track to feel otherly, because I feel like a thing that we usually don't get at in Christian music is the otherness of God. Like, he's not like us. He's different from us. He's much bigger than us, much grander than us, much more powerful than us. Like, we can't even comprehend the fullness of who he is. So I feel like to capture that in music, you have to do things that are a little bit jarring sometimes to the ear, to open the ear up. But they also have to be inviting at the same time, because the Lord is inviting. He's not just chaos. So he is this other thing that is huge and expansive, but he's inviting us in to have a relationship with him. So I wanted this track to feel like something that was huge and expansive and other, but that was also pulling in at the same time and not pushing away. And that was like a really hard line to ride. To increase how like circular everything feels, in addition to having that G that's held throughout the entire track, I decided to add on another melody. And so that melody is this guy that comes in here. And that plays throughout the remainder of that instrumental track as well, and gets more intense as it goes on. So this chord progression is in fours, I would think of it as, or eight. And the length of the phrases is undetermined. The length of the phrases for this melody, I think, is actually in bars of 12. And so what that does is increase the feeling of it being this thing that's unveiling and unfolding, because the melody keeps coming in at different sections in the chord progression, making you focus on different chords. And that gets it to feel like it's not just this repetitive thing, but that it's actually this thing that's unfolding and constantly changing, even though it stays constant. Which again, is how the Lord is. He's infinite, so there's always a different aspect of him that you can see, but he's also constant and never changing. And so I like playing on those two things by having this melody be in different bars so that it would come in at different parts of the chord progression every time it looped. So we have all this, that's my CPU overloading. So we have all of this granular stuff slowly fading in, and that's just to add intensity and to feel like there's this thing that's unfolding and unveiling. Music is about more than just melody and harmony. It's also about texture and timbre. As these chords are doing what they're doing, I wanted the sound to be constantly expanding and opening so that it feels like it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So we have all of these high frequency sounds that are granular, that are adding a lot of energy to the track as they fade in, and this Nord sound as well, this synth here. As the song goes on, I'm opening up the high frequency filter, or the low pass filter on it, so that the high frequencies come through. And so as the sound gets more and more intense as the track goes on, and it builds and opens and opens and opens. And another thing that I like to do a lot is play with the pitch. So like while I was playing the chords, I was wiggling the pitch bend a little bit, just to get it to have a little bit more of an organic character and not just feel like a synthesizer, but feel like something that's alive. So all these things are opening and everything is getting more and more intense and increasing. And then about halfway through, I was like, okay, this is really interesting, but it needs to change and feel like it's going somewhere. And the change that happens is in your expectation of where the switch is coming into the next key. And it's in the bass. So if we go, I think it happens around here. Now it feels like we're somewhere else. I love this one. That resolution by holding on that. Oh my god. What it's doing there is, okay, we've established this chord progression that loops and loops and loops and loops. Now it needs to say something now that we have your attention. So it changes and switches and starts to play with how it's been floating between these two keys. It completely shifts and changes so that you get this whole new, different, unique experience. All right, so that was the breakdown of Sincere and the Unveiling. Thank you for indulging my music nerdiness. If you made it all the way through to this part, you must really love music, and I applaud you. Either that or you just really love me, and for that, I also applaud you. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the track. Stay tuned for some more breakdowns of tracks from the Unveiling. We're going to get into some other ones as well and explain a little bit more about how these themes sort of interweave and work together to create that whole experience. All right, peace. I'll talk to y'all later.